decentralized has become disconnected. And I think that's very dangerous. I mean, if you look at some second century or third century writings of the church, here's what Paul would do. Paul would go into a town, first century. He would share the gospel with people. He would plant a church. He would raise up to what he called elders, and then he would leave.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to, my gosh, Joey, is this episode 6? I
think so.
Let's pretend it's episode 6. I probably should have checked that fact before I pressed go, but we are broadcasting episode 6 of Wait, That's a Church. Was that the correct?
Okay. I'm still waiting for my bobblehead.
All right. Jason Shepperd. As a title for a show announced, like, rate me. You are you're the French judge. I am the gymnast just doing the vault. How was that? Wait, that's a church on a scale of 1 to 10.
Oh, no doubt that's a 10. I could
awesome.
Not. I don't know how people get it as good as you got it. That's a 10.
I have the gold medal. I am standing proud. The Church.digital 8-bit song is playing across the loudspeakers. This is a glorious moment in the history of, well, it's the Church.digital's got a short history, so we don't have many glorious moments. This is the glorious moment right here. Hey, thank you for that. Hey, listen, it's another episode. We're glad to be doing this, and as you can tell, we're going to have some fun today. Of course, we got Joey Santos, co-host here for Wait, That's a Church. Joey, thanks for jumping on the show again with us.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jeff. We're excited about it, to having this conversation with Jason today about Jason Shepperd, about, microchurch and the big church, right? Like how this two words collide. Somehow he got some history with that, and we're excited about to have this conversation with him.
Yeah, I got to tell you, when Joey and I started talking about doing this show, maybe it was like the second name we listed. We got to talk to Jason Shepperd. We got to bring him in and get into it. So I always love having Jason on, and through the Church.digital podcast, we've had 2 or 3 conversations, usually at very strategic times. Jason, I usually bring you in right when I'm thinking about doing something really either radical or stupid, and kind of asking you without asking you what your opinion is. Like, how do you do this? Trying to figure out if I really want to do this. And so I don't know that I'm intentionally doing that this round. I think Joey's on the verge of doing something either radical or stupid, but more radical or more stupid. But definitely looking forward to having this part of this conversation with you. Hey, so just even to set this up, because Jason, you've got, I don't know, your fingers in everything. Everything. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What are you up to? Give the audience some background.
Well, my name is Jason Shepperd. By the way, thanks for having me, Jeff. I love anything you're hosting. I love the way you think. I love the way you try to get thoughts to people to help them. I love how you're using your gifts to do that. So I like being a part of it. If you ask me to do something, I'm going to do everything I can to be a part of it. So thank you. And Joey, I really have enjoyed meeting you over the years and what you're doing. And you and I have talked some about it. And I love what you're going after. So thanks for having me, guys. Yeah, my name is Jason Shepperd. I live on the north side of Houston in a community called the Woodlands, Texas. I've lived here for like 27 years. Grew up in a smaller East Texas town called Tyler. After college, came here to work in a church. Never thought I'd work in churches, pre-med in college. Felt like God was calling me to give my life to, the gospel in the local church. And I spent many of my years in churches that I felt a dissonance in between what I read about in the scriptures and what I was helping build. And I was a part of some great churches by many metrics, some good things that were happening for sure, but I felt like we were missing out on the most that God had for church. So in 2010, I just left everything I'd ever been a part of or building, and I launched what we now call Church Project.
Yeah, we're gonna get into this, and as Joey alluded, I literally just put into Discord, letting people who are broadcasting know on Twitch. He's a lead pastor of a mega church and the microchurch network. And I don't know how many people like in America. Can anybody else say that they deal with that dichotomy, the bifurcation at those two extremes, a mega church and a network?
It depends on who you ask. So, some of the people that you and I know and respect that lead some of the biggest things in the nation, people who I would call church scientists, if you will, they understand the science of church. They would say, no, we're the only one. Other people would say, no, we're sort of like other things. It depends on what you define as a microchurch. It depends on what you define as a house church. It depends on what you define as all these things. So I don't know anybody who's exactly like us. And that's not because I'm trying to be a unicorn, because it's a lonely world out there. But I would love to have people who are exactly like us. I find some people who are sort of similar. We can have fellowship and learn from each other. But I don't find many people I don't know anybody who's exactly like us. That doesn't mean that we're better. That just means that we're pretty different, I think.
Yeah. I mean, so even just give us some background. I know Joey's chomping at the bit to ask some questions here, but how did you end up? I mean, I'm assuming Mega Church was first. How did you end up from mega to micro, and maybe just a definition on the relationship?
Well, I mean, I guess the word mega doesn't have to fit into what we're doing, although it would by many definitions now. I prefer the idea of macro micro hybrid. And I think that is what is unique. No matter the size, I believe, biblically, I first pursued this through an ecclesiology. I mean, the theology of church. I think most people are pursuing a philosophy or a practice rather than a theology that's driving their practice. So, I mean, I didn't start with either. I started with the theology of the church. And so I spent a lot of time and a lot of years studying scripturally, historically, and globally. What does the church look like? Like, what did Jesus intend? And especially the early church for the first few centuries, it was mad how rapidly the gospel spread around the world and how many churches were planted. So what was the container for the gospel? Same gospel, but the container changed at some point, which changed everything. And so, this started with an ecclesiology, which led me to a conviction of what I would say is a macro micro hybrid. And you could we were the same way when we had 40 people. In fact, in a book I wrote about it, is just a janky little book telling the story with a little bit of theology, a little bit of practice, a little bit of story. I said, I knew that we'd be this way, whether we had 40 people or 400 or 4,000. I never knew if we'd be 400 people or 4,000 people. So mega's never been a goal, but a macro micro hybrid was a goal at 40 people. And so that's why I define it as a church of house churches. We're one church, but we're made up of many house churches. And when you start to dissect the differences in a normal macro church or normal centralized church and a traditional micro church movement now, you'll see some significant differences.
So from day one, it sounds like you were wanting a macro micro hybrid. It's interesting. Normally hybrid, physical digital hybrid, but the merging of the two ideas together. What are some examples of some things that have been a struggle? Because those are really two conflicting ideas. Like, I wouldn't call myself a church scientist, but I've spent a lot of time at mega churches, and mega churches and giga churches are not very relational. You're a number, a trend to be not very relational, I should say. A micro. I've done a lot of church plants, and I've started a lot of small, and that tends to be heavily relational. Like, what are some of those tensions that you feel maybe trying to hybrid the macro and the micro together?
I do think size is a difficult thing to discuss. I think structure is a better thing to discuss.
Okay.
If you look at what sociologists say about connection and connectivity and community, really, if you get into any group beyond 70 or 80 people, you're losing connectivity with everyone. And so you'll find really the same kinds of things at a church of 200 as you will at a church of 2,000. Everyone's not connected to everybody in a church of 200. And so really, what is the structure whereby every individual can be deeply connected to somebody in a church of 200 people or a church of 2,000 people? And so for me, the size conversation is difficult because sociologically, we're disconnecting from everyone in the community past 80 people. Some would say less, some would say a little more. And the first church had 3,000 people in one day. And Jesus said he'd build his church and he put 3,000 people into it. So I think the size thing is a tough thing, because at what point is the size sinful? And at what point is the size wrong? And also for us, man, we've never gone after trying to get 4,000 or 5,000 people together in one place on the weekend. I haven't tried to do that. We haven't gone after that. We just had 40 people. And we've never done any marketing, any mailers, not trying to get more people to come here for that. So size is a real difficult conversation to have, because where do you draw the line and why are you drawing the line? And then we should probably draw the line way below. And I've known a lot of small churches who are way off base when it comes to what Jesus wanted his church to be. And so I like to talk about structure more than I like to talk about size, but I want theology to drive all of it. So yeah, I mean, we started as we are now, in the same way, a macro-micro hybrid.
Really cool. Hey, we are broadcasting this on Twitch, and we got Whitebeard Punk Mock. I told you, Jason, Whitebeard's gonna be in the room. He'll ask some questions. He's my smart aleck guy. Flat Cap is here as well. Whitebeard, I love you. You know that. And some others. Feel free to ask questions in chat as we're going along. But Joey, let me hand it over to you. What do you got?
Yeah, Jason, man, thanks so much for giving the opening and explanation. But let's talk a little bit about the response. Like, my understanding is that you didn't start as a micro church, right? Like, you started just in a regular church. Is that correct?
No,
just like
it's not
everybody
correct.
else. So you started as a micro church.
Yeah,
Well,
in fairness, Joey just stepped away from the camera, and so
Yeah.
he did not hear the eloquent question explained before.
Yeah.
It was, and so he started micro, but it extended out to, I assume, a lot of micros.
We did not start as an either or. We started as a both and. We started as a hybrid. And again, I cannot walk away from this hybrid theologically, ecclesiologically, biblically. I see it everywhere.
So when you say that, so for example, from the beginning, what was the argument for people to understand the value of, why don't we just grow, build a building, and do what traditionally what church do? And what was your argument to get people to really embrace the vision of, this is how we're going to do church?
Well, I think it's really hard. You guys are talking to a lot of church leaders, a lot of church planners. I do that all the time too. I care about the kingdom. I care about the Big C church. I'm spending a lot of time talking with people about this. Again, the difficulty is most people are not starting theologically. They don't know how to have an argument, if you will, based on scripture. I mean, for me, Joey, I wanted to sit down and, rather than argue with people, show them what I saw in scripture, and this is what we're pursuing.
Mm-hmm.
And so rather than, it's really hard to argue the next thing, the next philosophy, the next movement, the next model. I'm bored with that. I'm tired of that. I don't want to do that anymore. And then what is it next? And then what is it next? And so I think I heard a very famous pastor one time say, the most relevant things are timeless. And so I believe that when Jesus built his church, he inserted some DNA that was going to last forever. And so for me, all I've done is continue to preach and practice these biblical principles over and over and over. And I can tell you why people don't like it, or why they don't want it, or why they try it and leave. I can tell you that. But I don't try to argue against philosophies or things. I just practice and preach these biblical principles. And I can tell you this, not everybody wants it. Most people don't. But I'm not living towards their acceptance. I have a conviction that I'm leading out of, and it's been a fun and beautiful thing to do.
No, it is because and I got the experience now through the church, the bar, right? Much smaller group, get together, very little very little business related to what we do. Is pretty much just get together, worship together, pray together, study the Bible together. It has been a very different experience from what I personally used to, and I really enjoy that. I really enjoy having that experience. Uh, and before we actually start the podcast today, uh, Jeff and I were talking about, how many churches the Apostle Paul planted, and wrote letters to trying to help them and advance the kingdom where they were, direct them to the gospel. And one of the things I talking to Jeff about is like Paul talks so much about the relational aspect of the church. Like his letters were about, you know, realigning them with the what Jesus wants them to do as a church, but it didn't have much to do with. I feel like a lot of churches end up worrying about it these days. Is are we growing fast enough? Are we bringing in people fast enough? Are we, and I don't mean reaching people. I'm not against reaching people that way, but at the same time, is when it comes to the mission of the church, discipleship, is that actually happening? Are we accomplishing the mission? So my question to you is like, how do you see this model that you embrace that's biblical? How do you see that the discipleship model fitting into that? Like I want to hear about the discipleship model and how that actually kind of fit into the whole context of the microchurch model that you're leading.
Well, I don't really know how to say discipleship model. I'm approaching things really differently than, um, an aspect of
Hmm.
discipleship here. Everything for us is holistically integrated. I
Yeah.
mean, you think about the life of Jesus, right? I mean, tell me that Jesus wasn't doing something that was making disciples. Everything about Jesus' life was discipleship. So when Jesus taught people on a mountainside by the thousands, was that not discipleship? When Jesus lived life together with people by the dozens in close, intimate community, was that not discipleship? When he sent them out um, to feed the hungry or clothe the naked or give water to the thirsty or take care of the widow and the orphan, was that not discipleship? When he spent time one on one with people, was that not discipleship? And so for me, I'm really actually concerned about language, philosophy, approach
Hmm.
that separates, a discipleship model. Everything we do should be about discipleship. My
Hmm.
concern with the church has been how they do these things. So when you say mega church, for many people that would mean some, you know, elaborate show production on a Sunday morning. That's not really fair to say that every large church is that way because so many of them are. Sadly, I mean we're we're counteracting the nastiness that we've seen over the last couple of generations of churches, but there are plenty of people. We started with 40 people on a Sunday morning, doing the same thing that we do now with 4,000 people on a Sunday morning, right here in the same city.
Hmm.
And so we don't do anything different. We don't we haven't changed. We don't have any production. We haven't changed anything. So somebody wouldn't criticize us when we had 40 people, but maybe they would when we had 400 or 4,000. Why? We're 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 just preaching the word. We're gathering in a super simple building of plastic chairs, a gym, concrete floors, just same thing we did with 40 people, we do with 4,000.
Hmm.
So, I think that's why it's hard for me to say a mega church or whatever. What does that mean? I hate the approaches that many churches are doing, even very small churches. For me, it's not about size, it's about the approach. What are you doing when you gather together? I've seen a lot
Hmm.
of the microchurch movement rebel against any corporate gathering together. So my question is,
Yeah.
it's wrong for you to have all of your connected microchurches. It's wrong for you to ever get together. Why would that be wrong? I think what you could do when you're together could be wrong. Um, but getting together, is that wrong? And so for us, I couldn't find in scripture that it was wrong. In fact, I
Hmm.
found that it was right. that all of us would gather together. But then we've distributed pastoral leadership. We've decentralized this thing. People live in diverse discipleship communities that are geographically located. And so rich, deep discipleship community is happening all over the place. Sunday morning actually supports these disciples. What we're studying the scripture together, and then we're wrestling through these passages together in our house churches all over our city. This week, a young father died. Like, new family to our church, young father died. The house church is in, bam, all over it. There's things happening that I never know about. Somebody bought somebody a car. Somebody, they're helping somebody buy a house. Like, house churches are doing all these things that we read about in scripture, but every Sunday we get together. I say the Sunday gathering serves the house churches all across our city. It also protects doctrine all across our city. We could dive deeply into any of that if you ever wanted to, but discipleship for us is everything we do. A couple this week, I saw them on Sunday. They got involved in a house church finally this year. And this past week, they were feeding the homeless under bridges, right? Which some other people in their house church do, people across house churches do. It's one of the ministry partners we support. They finally are out having good God conversations with people, serving the homeless. That's part of their discipleship for me. And now they know people's names under bridges and things like that. Everything we do is discipleship. I don't have a discipleship model. I have an ecclesiology that I practice, and everything we do is discipleship. And by the way, I'm not mad at you. I'm just into it.
This is what it's like to have a conversation with me. I'm listening to you talk, and I'm like, it's like I'm looking in a mirror. It's just digital and not. Anyway, go ahead, please. Go ahead, Joey.
No,
yeah, cut that off.
I just like he used the word decentralized church,
yes.
Right? And tell us a little bit about, you still gather together in a big corporate setting on Sunday morning, right? But then during the week you have these house churches going on. So how that configures into the decentralized model?
Well, here's the thing. Decentralized has become disconnected. And I think that's very dangerous. I mean, if you look at some second century or third century writings of the church, here's what Paul would do. Paul would go into a town, first century. He would share the gospel with people. He would plant a church. He would raise up to what he called elders, and then he would leave. You can quote me on this if you want. I like how I say this next thing. But Paul would always follow up in person, by proxy, or by pen. Like, Paul would always follow up with whatever ministry he started. In person when he could, if he wasn't in prison or when he had time. By proxy when he couldn't. Hey, I'm going to send Titus to you. I'm going to send Timothy to you. I'm going to send Crescens to you. Or by pen. I can't get there. I can't send somebody else. I'm going to write a letter to you. And so Paul would go to a place and plant a church. What would happen? Well, they would start a house church. But then what would happen when more believers came to that house church in a city? Well, they would start another house church. And then what would happen? They'd start another one. But they were one church in this city to the church in this town. They were writing to the whole church, but they were gathering in smaller communities as house churches, but they were connected under one presbytery, one eldership, one common overseer, so that together all these house churches led. The problem with being decentralized, you're either diminished centralization or you're completely disconnected. For us, we're diminishing centralization. But to completely eradicate centralization, let me ask this question. Who's caring for your house church pastors or your microchurch leaders? Yeah. Who do they have accountability to? Who's pastoring them? Who's protecting the doctrine here? And so when we decentralize to the point of disconnectedness, well, we've gotten into danger. But when you diminish centralization, but you still have light centralization, I mean, Alan Hirsch talks about this in his movements about movement DNA. When you have light connectivity, you can start a movement. When you have no connectivity or too much, you stifle movements. And so I've seen people swing the pendulum away from this, what we have seen, the massive centralization of the church, right? Where everything flows through the guy or the office. And so we swung the pendulum and there's no centralization. There's no elder authority. There's no oversight. There's no accountability. There's no discipleship. So no, we've diminished centralization. Here's an idea. We're a massive church. We have no phone number. We have no foyer. We have no receptionist. There's no way you can get to our small team of people. We're hidden. Like we serve all the house churches and we serve these ministries that connect house churches, but the centralization part is inaccessible. We serve the people who serve all the people. And so it's wild for us. My name's not even on our website. People come to our church and don't know my name for a long time. They may hear my voice because I'm using one of my gifts to preach. But other than that, people don't know me. They don't know my name. And so I love it. And so we've diminished centralization, but I will do this. I'll go meet with 200 of our house church leaders on Sunday night. And 2 Sunday nights ago we did. And I'll be talking with them about what house church is. I meet with the coaches of the house churches, right? So we have connectivity so that we can support them. We can hold them accountable. We can make sure doctrine is protected. We're all going in the same direction. So we've diminished centralization. But when you decentralize to the point of disconnectivity, well, then you're in the danger area.
Yeah.
I'll take a breath.
That was a lot of D's. I just want to call it. I mean, I don't know if you're channeling your Southern Baptist pastor or not, but like your alliteration level is very good, right there. Let's take a breather. Hopefully this doesn't get you too worked up. Flat Cap Leighton is asking, when you're having some of these conversations, like what are the top passages that you use to help understand a micro approach versus some of the others? Like what passages are you falling back on to prove? Leighton does a lot of micro as well, so I think that's the reason for him asking.
Well, great. No, I love it. It should be a great question. One, I've written about it. We'll talk about it a lot of places, but you see Paul say to the church that meets in so-and-so's house a lot, right? You talk about that, but Titus for me, chapter 1 is a great place to go to just to see a more clear picture, one of the pastoral letters. And so Paul told Titus, the reason why I left you in Crete, which any church leader should stop and say, oh, I need to figure this out. What is Paul about to say to another pastor about pastoring a church in a city? So he said, the reason I left you in Crete was to straighten out what is unfinished, appoint elders in every town as I directed you, and teach what is in accord with sound doctrine. So this is what Paul told Titus, the reason why you're a pastor in this city, in Crete, I want you to straighten out what's unfinished. Paul planted a church, but it needed order. It actually needed systems and structures and processes to care for people. I mean, we see the early apostles doing that, right? Like, how are we going to make sure these types of widows are getting fed? We need to figure that out. So Paul's saying, straighten out what's unfinished. I planted a church, but we got to straighten some things out. The problem is some churches that's when they move from organic to an organization. I say you've become an organization when you are existing to feed the structures in the system.
And the organization.
But we're organic, right? I mean, my body is organic. I was pre-med. I don't know a whole lot anymore, but I know a little bit. And I know all of the systems and all the structures in our human body. There's nothing more organic than the human body. We can procreate in the image of God, but we have systems and structures. And so to not have systems and structures in anything that we do doesn't make sense. Down to a plant, it has it. And so, but we have light systems and structures, as light as possible. The systems and structures serve the health of the body. The body doesn't exist to run the systems and structures. And I think most churches are existing to keep the systems and structures running, whereas we need light. My structures and systems, they're invisible. They're autonomic. They're just happening. I don't even know it. I know I'm unhealthy when a system stops working, but I'm not paying attention to this system. And so when a church, our systems are invisible. They're light. They're behind the scenes. But I know that we're healthy. When we have a breakdown in health, we look at a system. So Paul told Titus, the reason I left you Crete, straighten out what's unfinished, and then appoint elders in every town as I directed you. So Paul, part of this organization, to Titus, and now Titus is appointing an elder in every city. And so for us, we say a leader available to everyone. Because what Paul did not want Titus doing is, Titus, you're the guy. You're the guy in Crete. You're going to go pastor all these people. So Monday, head here. Tuesday, head here. Wednesday, head here. Or rather, Titus, rather than you being the central person, why don't you just build a place and all these people can come to you? No, 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 no. I want wherever people live, I want them to have a pastor available to them, appoint an elder in every town, right? And then Paul tells what the qualities and qualifications should be of that person. But Paul is saying, hey, look, man, let's give all the people a pastor. And Titus, you oversee them. You make sure they're living this way. Here's their qualifications. You got to hold them accountable. And Titus, you need to teach them sound doctrine. Make sure sound doctrine's happening in all these cities. But you appoint the pastors, but they got to have some centralization for accountability and for training. And so you see that in Titus chapter 1 and the beginning of chapter 2, verse 1. We see this model there, and then you start to see it really everywhere else. So that's a place that I would go and say, you have leaders who appoint other leaders who pastor all the people. And the leader who appointed the leaders, we pastor the leaders. Titus was pastoring the elders in every town, and the elders in every town were pastoring the people in that town. And so there was probably a house church in little towns, little villages all around Crete. So were there 2, were there 20, were there 30? We don't know. But what we do know is Titus was pastoring the house church pastors, and those house church pastors were pastoring the people there. So for me, that's where we get into this distributed leadership.
It's so good. As you started with this mindset in place, the micro, multiple micro. I mean, you're talking about pastoring pastors, which isn't a language we often hear. Where did these ideas come from? Like within you? Were you mentored this way? Did you have someone in your life that was a micro church? Did you have an experience? Are you disenfranchised with other models? Like what's the impetus story in Jason Shepperd that got us here?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm asked that question a lot, and I'm 50 now. I started Church Project when I was 35 or 36. And I grew up in church, hearing the gospel, grew to love Jesus and love the word and love the church. But as I started studying the church in scripture, I thought, oh, I haven't experienced so much of this. What's wrong? And so in college, 30 years ago, I started wrestling with this. I made some notes. I remember sitting in my truck in an apartment complex in college, making notes about the church. And I just started thinking, if the church is the body of Christ, what should the church look like? Like, what did Christ look like? What should the church look like? So I've been wrestling with this stuff for 30 years. Before I changed my major and changed my future, I wrestled with this stuff like through college, because this is my prayer. I remember praying this prayer in college. I said, God, if you want me to devote my life to the local church, let me be a part of what you originally intended for it to be. So that was my prayer 3 decades ago and 15 years before I started Church Project. And so I've been doing this now for, 14 years. But I love the church, and I love the scriptures. And I believe that Jesus, if he built his church, it would be enduring. And so I believe that he built a church that was immediately cross-cultural. It worked for all people in all places for all times. That's why the first church was birthed, with people from many dozens of different countries. And so I just started getting curious. How did he build that church that worked in Egypt and in Italy? How did it work? It worked all over the world immediately with different customs, different language, different backgrounds. So, the answer, Jeff, is no. I didn't have anybody. I didn't know who to read. I didn't see a church like this. So no, I didn't know what to do. And I can tell you this, when I started Church Project, I was really lonely and I didn't fit anywhere anymore. I didn't fit in the traditional church world, because people are like, what are these words? I had people get mad at me for calling house churches a church and house church pastors a pastor. I mean, I had pastors literally angry at me, especially when we started to grow. So, I was lonely for a very long time. But then in the microchurch world, some people are like, well, you don't fit here either because you have too much centrality for us, so you're not one of us. So we've been sort of in the middle of, we're not in the traditional church world anymore, but the microchurch world doesn't really know how to take us either. And so, no, I haven't really known who to learn from. I do have some friends and some people, some names you and I know, that we have mutual respect for each other. They love what we're doing. I love what they're doing. We do it a little bit differently, but I've been able to have some, friendships with people in this world now. But for a long time, it was lonely. And for somebody doing it just like us, hard to find. The nomenclature's out there. I mean, people use the word house church liberally now, but I'm like, you're not really. People use the word decentralized now, but I'm like, you're not really. And again, I'm not trying to prove people wrong or prove me right. I'm just saying, I don't find anybody who's really as decentralized as we are and really has really distributed pastoral leadership. I mean, I got doctors and engineers and teachers doing weddings and funerals and baptisms and all benevolence, all discipleships happening. I mean, we've distributed this leadership. We're really decentralized. So I don't really know people like us, but again, I'm not trying to win anything.
Now,
Go ahead, Joey.
I like it because it really steps away from any version of a personality driven church, right? I mean, that's a big deal, I think. But I think pastors listening to the podcast, watching this podcast, Jason, they have one big question in mind, I assume, is how does this works financially? Like how the finances of this way of doing church with different microchurches and different pastors, distributor pastors, how does it actually work financially?
I mean, again, for me, I don't really deal in questions like this anymore. It's so foreign to me because when I read scripture, it's really clear that the local body, they gave together. I would bring money laid at the apostles' feet. They gave together to support church plants in other places. So the worst thing in the world for me would be if somebody plopped many millions of dollars down on us, and they haven't. It hasn't happened ever. And
I'll take it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, anybody, feel free.
I do something good with it, but I would not stop the discipleship of giving. I mean, giving is it's Jesus's number one topic. He talked about money and he talked about giving. I want our people giving. We say we want you to be giving to good and giving to the gospel. And we believe in the beauty of the local church. We want our people discipled in the arena of giving. But what people love about giving to a church that we're so simple, like we're super simple and we're radically generous. And so we all want to give together, but we're very simple. There is a movement about people not taking any salaries from a church, but I also think that is not biblical. We've seen abuse, but we shouldn't swing the pendulum of abuse, which there has been abuse for sure. We shouldn't swing the pendulum of abuse to another arena of abuse. I mean, there's a beautiful thing about a church supporting their local pastors, their local overseers. I mean, Paul talked about that. There are movements of microchurch leaders that are asking us at Church Project to help support them so they can continue doing the work. Is that wrong? I mean, all of us had to pay our bills and, put gas in our car. And so there is a beauty of people in a body supporting gospel workers. But I hate the abuse of it. So our church, we have like 1/4 the size staff that most churches our size would have. We have, our building is mortgage neutral. I mean, right now I don't know how many ministries are using our building today and all week long, and we have people renting it. I mean, I have a whole philosophy. I call it a theology of space. I do a whole discussion on a theology of space. And I think that's something we really have to change in the church. I'll digress for this one comment. One of the worst aspects of bad stewardship in the church has been how we've stewarded space, buildings. It's been super bad. Yet I was on a Zoom with a pastor from Miami today who would just love a place where he can gather with his people a little bit. So space, I mean, we all need it because of the fall. Just like we need clothes, we need a building if we're going to ever gather. But we have homes. So where we gather is super simple. Anyway, so our people give together. We support our pastors who work for us. We have super ton of accountability with a board and elders and other principals. We barely have any pastors, for the size church that we have. And then we're radically generous. But yeah, we give corporately, but also we have no idea. We'll never know. We don't want to know. We don't try to measure the stories of generosity that happen in house churches are unreal. We have no idea. So we give corporately as a body, but people are also, meeting other people's needs, as we see in Acts 2. They sold their goods, possessions, gave to anyone that had need, do good to all people, especially to the household of believers. I mean, this is happening in house churches all across our city. We don't quantify it. We don't know how much. I mean, if we quantified that, it'd be astronomical.
Well, and looking for like pastors listening to this right now thinking, okay, I got this church, whatever size that is right now, is still, what does transition look like to a church that's more distributed? Like, what would be like their first step for them to say like, okay, how do I actually look at this this way of doing church where I actually make pastors in microchurches and put people in houses or whatever that looks like. And this podcast is about church expressions, and that can be any expression, right? We meet at a bar. We had a conversation with Michael back just a few weeks ago when we talked about, he has church happening in the um, yoga establishments or even like Tesla
Tattoo
charger
parlors
stations.
and all over the
Exactly,
place, man.
right?
Great.
Right.
Tesla
So
chargers,
it's
crazy.
not limited. It's just this is about the
Sure.
expression of the church that happens in different ways. But if I'm already established church with such established customs and way of doing things, and I see this as a way of really spreading the gospel in the whole sense of what Jesus says, go and make, now we're going to get our church to go and make what that looks like for a church to
Sure.
transition into something like that.
Yeah, we have this conversation all the time, but I will press into something that you just said. When you say you have church in a bar, I mean, for me, I'm like, is that macro church or micro church? I mean, which is that? And if it's micro church, are you going to multiply your micro churches, or is that macro church? And if so, are you going to grow your macro church? And so for me, the question becomes when people are like, I'm meeting in all these places. That's awesome. Is that your macro church altogether, or is it all your micro churches are meeting together in a bar? Great. Or is that a micro church meeting in a bar? Well, where's a macro? Oh, wait, we're not going to grow. We're just going to stay one micro church forever.
Yeah.
That blows my mind too. Of our gospel, not you, but of other people's
Yeah.
like, we're one micro church. We're going to meet here. No. We're called to share the gospel. The Lord's adding to their number daily, those who are being saved. And so we can meet anywhere. Macro, we can meet anywhere. Micro, we can meet anywhere. My question becomes for people, is that your macro church meeting there or your micro church meeting there? If somebody's in a traditional church right now, the thing that we try to help them do is to say, hey, look, you have to start distributing leadership and decentralizing. So there's 3 DNA elements that I write about, talk about all the time. You go to jasonshepperd.com and read it. It's just for free right on there, the first thing. But it's just a little PDF, like distributed pastoral leadership, decentralized away from primary, place, and priest, and diverse discipleship communities. So what we're telling people is, if you want to head this way, and I think everybody should, then you have to distribute pastoral leadership, which means you need to take your Sunday school teacher or small group leader or whatever. You need to take them and you need to make them a pastor. Take your leader and make them a pastor. And you need to take your group and you need to make it a church. Now you define what is a church and what is a pastor. But what we've done is we've limited, hey, a group, this, you stop right here. This is all you do. And a pastor or a leader, you stop right here. And what we'll do is everything that goes above the leader, hey, we'll get it to the real pastor. We'll get it up here to the real clergy. I mean, this guy went to seminary, man. So, hey, you do this. That's great. Lead your discussion, teach your group, pray for each other. But anything above that, just get it to the real pastor. So we're like, no, take the lid off that leader or teacher. Take that leader and make him a pastor. And then when it comes to your group, your Sunday school class, whatever, take the lid off of that, man, and make that thing a church. All the functions of a church happen in your house church now. And so if somebody's not willing to do it, they're not going to do anything. And so they're frustrated. I get the frustration. These kind of churches, on the whole, they're going away. The bigger are getting bigger, but the medium and smaller are getting smaller and smaller, and many are going away. And so, these guys are frustrated. I need to change some what I need to do, but they're not really, they just want to survive. They want to keep things the way they are. They're just going to try a different approach. I'm like, hey, look, man, are you willing to take your Sunday school teacher and make that person a pastor? Are you willing to let them do weddings and funerals and baptisms? Are you willing to let this group become a church? They're going to function as a church. And by the way, a church is diverse. You never saw a church in the Bible that was like, hey, this is just for 20-somethings, right? And so, no, that's a group. It's not a church. Groups aren't bad, but it's not a church. A church is like, Jew or Greek, slave or free, male or female. I mean, a church is rich and poor. It's all these things going on. So a church is diverse. That's why we gather geographically. When you gather geographically, you force diversity. So if somebody wants to do it, we're like, we can help you take your leaders and make them pastors. And we can help you take your groups and make it a church. You want to do that? But a lot of them don't want to do it.
I know.
And I'm not
It
going
is.
to jump into that.
I know we learn from our mistakes, right? So remember, 5 years ago when we started the church at the bar, we look at a space where we be today, and it's a space where inside the bar we can have up to 400 people. So in our minds, it was like, man, let's fill this place with people, and that was our first thought going in. Like let's do it as an outreach, bring people in. And as we start this, the model that we do is a little different than a traditional church service because we break up the message into 3 or 4 parts, ask questions, and allow people to participate in the conversation, right? So we teach the Bible. I say the Bible is the authority. I'm not the authority. The Bible is the authority here, and I'm just a mall cop. All I got is a flashlight, and we're just going to walk through this together. And we ask questions throughout the message, and people talk. And what we learned pretty fast is that we had to change the mindset of, instead of thinking about growing this numerically, we need to understand what's the number that accommodates for this relationship that we have as a small church. And we got to that limit. We got to think about where else can we go so we don't lose that. So if more people come in, we realize they need to have the same experience of closeness and togetherness. So if we realize, like we do Easter service at the church, the bar, and all of a sudden 80 people come in, and it's not the same anymore. Because when we have the group that we have that's smaller, we're actually looking at now into, like, as we see growth happening, we're like, now we're already preparing 2 leaders. And because, listen, as soon as we get to that point, we're going to go play someplace else. And then,
well, see, that's the conversation we would have with a house church. That's how we talk about a house church. Our house church is getting too big. You can't have community in house church when it's over this many people. So we're always preparing for the next house church pastor, the house church host. So the way you're talking about your macro is the way we have talked about our micro from the very beginning.
Yeah,
but
it is, right? No, I'm just saying it is the fact of the church. There's a change of a mindset there, because I think when we start a church, we always started with, like, let's see how many people can gather here. But when your mindset is community, is really building that relationship where we share with each other, where we really have a relationship with each other, it becomes harder if the group is too big. So you got to walk
again. That's your micro conversation.
Exactly.
That's your micro conversation. Community was never meant to happen when 3,000 people were getting together. That's where they were listening to the apostles' teaching. They were breaking bread together. They were never intending. Do we think that when it says they were selling their possessions and goods and giving to anybody as they have need, was that happening in a room of 3,000 people? No way. There's so much evidence of house churches all across the city of Jerusalem. So they weren't doing that on Sunday when they gathered together for the apostles' teaching. That was never meant for community. And so for me, our macro gathering is not meant for community. I mean, we can get people into community through it, but we're not trying to accomplish community in the macro. We're doing it really well in the micro. But some people are having micro conversations about the macro, or they're not having macro conversations at all. And so these are the things that I like to dissect. And
Yeah.
then if somebody wants to say macro is wrong, then I'll be like, okay, if you want to say macro is wrong, that's fine, but you can't argue for me biblically. But I can argue for macro being beautiful, and I can argue for micro the way that we do it. But most people are conflating the macro micro conversation. And so we never intend for community to happen in the macro. It doesn't exist for that. The problem is most churches focus all of their energy and their money and their time and attention on the macro.
Yeah.
And so for us, we focus very little attention on the macro, and all of our attention, most of our attention is on the micro.
That's good.
Jeff, were you about to say something? Sorry.
No, I think this is all great. Is there where is your macro micro? Is that in your book? Is that, written if people wanted to dig more into the philosophy here? I've never understood macro micro this way. And so this is kind of even new for me to wrap around, at least it phrased this way. So where could I dig deeper into it?
Yeah, I mean, Shepperd.com, Shepperd. I have some PDFs on there where people can just click on it, from theology of space to ecclesiology and those things. And then the link to the book is on there too. So,
Okay.
I mean, I think I didn't make enough money on a book last month to go take my wife to a nice dinner. So I'm not pushing it for that. It doesn't do anything for me, but it has helped a lot of people have this conversation about this, and at least know what you're choosing or not choosing, or get clarity and get some common language together. So I have 2 books there. I have some free writings there, just right on the page, and I think some podcast links, and like a couple of your podcasts with you, I think are linked on there, Jeff. And somebody that knows how to do stuff that I don't know will probably get this one and link it on there too.
Awesome. We'll be sure to pass the link upstream just to get the attention. So that's awesome, man. It's been great to hanging out with you here as we're digging in and exploring different models of church, and the large, the micro, and that is just such a good picture for this. So Jason, man, once again, I know we just got a couple minutes left, but thanks for hanging out with us. Joey, as we're landing the plane, any closing thoughts?
No, I appreciate, Jason, your time and having this conversation. I know there's so much to unpack in this conversation. You can spend hours here, but man, I truly appreciate your time. Man, we'll continue to pray for the church project and what God's going to do through you guys and in this town. Man, it's amazing, unbelievable to just see it, be able to watch and see what God's doing, and be an encouragement to pastors. We wanted this podcast, Jason, just so you know, to be an encouragement to other pastors out there to look at innovation, to look at, is there different ways of us to do church? Can we empower our people to go out and spread the gospel? And how do we do that? Can we renew our minds somewhere here? Right? Is there a way for us to think differently? And that's what we're trying to use this podcast to really do, that to kind of like get people to like just challenge yourself a little bit in your thoughts. And there are opportunities that God's putting in front of us, and we're missing it. Let's not miss those opportunities. So I appreciate your time today.
Love it. Jason, as we're landing the plane, any closing thoughts on your side?
Well, I'll say this. I love talking to people who love Jesus, who love his church, who love the lost, the people who are disconnected from him, and who believe that the gospel is the way of salvation. So I love having this conversation, and I love the way that you're doing it and what you're trying to do. So I'm honored that you invited me. I love spending my time having these conversations. I'm passionate about this, as I know you are as well. And I believe that God's doing something great in the church. And I think if we'll get back to the scriptures as our guide, we're rethinking by returning. So we're rethinking, but we're rethinking by returning. If people are rethinking, but not returning to the scriptures while they're rethinking, I think we're just on our next model, and we need to get back to what Jesus intended for his church. So thanks for having me, Jeff. I'm honored to be here. Joey, good to see you as well. Thanks for the invite, Jeff.
Awesome. And with that, we're going to land the plane. Thanks for Jason Shepperd for hanging out, Joey as well. But this is Jeff with theChurch.digital. Everybody also in Twitch, thanks for hanging out as well. But we're going to land it. So this is Jeff with theChurch.digital. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you next time on the show.